Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Arsitektur ITB. My name is from Arsitektur ITB. Now we have the first group talk this year, initiated by Daliana from South and also a group from University of Indonesia. Please, yang di luar bisa masuk. Selamat datang Pak Bugar. Yes, this talk actually collaboration between Ikatan Arsitek Indonesia, Jawa Barat, Departemen Program Studi Arsitektur ITB, dan juga Future Cities Lab from Singapore. Today's yes, please come in. Today we honored to have Professor Stephen Chen, Future City Labs Program Director and Principal Investigator of Urban Rural System. Thank you, Professor, for coming to this short event. So actually, we will have rather short discussion, lecture and discussion. So I hope we already arranged this sitting, so that we encourage you to actively discuss with the professor. Before we begin, saya perkenalkan, I introduce you Pak Heru Purbo, the head of graduate program of architecture, and also head of urban design program ITB, and also head of landscape architecture program ITB. Also Pak Bugar, the chairman of Ikatan Arsitek Indonesia Provinsi Jawa Barat, Gregorius Budi Lianto, is full name. We are greatly appreciated his collaboration in this event. So before we begin, I would like to shortly describe Professor Chen. Professor Chen completed an undergraduate degree in anthropology and classical studies from University of Otago, and he trained in architecture at University of Auckland and practiced as an architect in New Zealand. He undertook doctoral studies at the University of Melbourne, where he wrote a thesis on the colonial architecture in Java, with emphasis on aesthetic and the politics of representation. So right now he is the program director of Future Cities Laboratory in Singapore. Professor Stephen research is focused on architecture, design and urban planning, and takes theoretical and practical forms. So I get this brief CV from the Future City Labs website. I hope it is current. Yes. So Professor Chen work is focused on the complex pattern of settlement emerging in the predominantly rice-growing hinterland of many large cities in Southeast Asia, India and China. So I think the topic is relevant in our most of our cities. This practice-oriented research takes on the form of the Tropical Town Project. So many professor wrote some books that already published in the various publishers, including with Jane Jacobs Building Must Die, Perverse View of Architecture in 2014. Yeah. Okay, I think those are the brief description of Professor Chen. Before we begin, I would like to invite Pak Bugar to deliver introduction to this event. Please come forward, sir.
Harus bahasa Inggris ya? Kalau saya bahasa Inggris nggak bisa, tapi kalau bahasa Inggris sedikit bisa. Okay, Excellency Mr. Aswin, Professor Stephen, and all colleagues and friends. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May blessing and peace be blessed upon us. Let me introduce myself. My name is Georgius Budi Yulianto, but somehow they call me Bugar. I am the chairman of the Indonesian Institute of Architects West Java chapter. First of all, on behalf of IAI, I would like to thank for the presence of our friend here, and especially for Professor Stephen. We think it's a long time to go to Bandung, so welcome, sir. And our dear friend, in this today digital world, collaboration is the most important for us as a keyword for sharing experience and view, so as the enhance professional capabilities and open up the horizon for professional and even professional candidates as well. I think the group talk hopefully will always be awaited in order to raise the issues and bring up discussion of the current architectural and urban issues. We, Indonesian Institute of Architects West Java chapter, will always be at the front line in supporting much more programs like this. We open all kinds of cooperation to create any activities made to open horizon and improve capabilities in caring about urban and architectural issues. Maybe that's all I could say. So please enjoy the discussion. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you Pak Bugar. So anyone welcome? Oke, langsung saja. Kalau tidak ada, kita mulai saja. So let's begin, Professor. The time is yours.
So first, thank you so much for the welcome. I really appreciate everybody being here. Nice to see some old friends from Europe. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very, very proud to be here, but also I want to thank Daliana because she and I and some other colleagues established something that we called Krupuk a long time ago, and we did the administration maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but we never knew what to do with this idea. We had an idea, and I'm very, very excited and very proud that this is the first branded Krupuk event, and I'm also proud that it's here of all places. So what I'm going to do is, we don't have too much time, and I've got too much material. So this is always what architects do, they give you too much stuff. So what I'm going to do is go quite through some of the 5 principles at the beginning, and then I'll show you a kind of project quite quick, and I think it would be great to have some discussion, and I can go back to some of the slides if you would like. So as you were reading that bio, this is exactly the slide that we should be looking at. I'm very interested in, I'll come to 5.5 later why that, but I'm interested in urban and design, these 2 terms. By school, I don't mean a particular school here, so this is not in a way a challenge to particular institutions who already have a school of urban design. This means a school of thought, just a way, an attitude. So this is much more kind of attitude, it's not a physical institutional framework. And why urban and why design? That's my opening sort of question. Urban is especially important here in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia, but also India and China, because of the condition that you can see in this drawing. So this drawing is showing you two kind of data sets. The red data is population density. So you can see straight away Jakarta, maybe you can see Surabaya. Anyway, so Surabaya here, Jakarta, you can see. Right. So pretty obvious is Tokyo, and then if you know Southeast Asia, there's Bangkok and Ho Chi Minh City. So these are all basically spikes of population density. Now the really interesting phenomenon here is the green data. The green data is basically rice production. And 2/3 of the world's rice production is concentrated in Southeast Asia, and East Asia and South Asia. So this slide shows you over half of the world's population. This is 4 billion people already living here, and 2/3 of the world's rice production. And that's a vast quantity of calories. So the relationship between people, density, and the calories is very, very significant. If I had a longer lecture, I could show you that this is exactly the opposite of the United States and Europe. So it's a completely different pattern. So this is a very unusual pattern. But of course, as I've said, this is the dominant pattern. This is not a minor condition. This is the dominant, statistically speaking, is the dominant condition in the world. So when it means thinking about the urban, this word here, this is not Aldo Rossi and the European city, even though we still have legacy and the intellectual framework, I think is still very important. We have to be thinking about the city in another relationship, and I think that relationship has to do with rural conditions. So the condition of the urban rural is especially a responsibility for thinking about the city in this part of the world. And I could talk much greater length about that argument, but we can come back to that perhaps as an argument. So that's why urban. Why design? There are many disciplines responsible for the city. It's not just architects. So urban planners, engineers, developers, financiers, governments, NGOs, many people, communities are making cities. But the architect has a special role, I think, in contributing to the city. Historically, that role was quite closely connected to urban planning, and then that role has increasingly, I think, been diminished. And I would also like to make a case to bring architecture and city planning back together again. And the word design is most important. It's the unique contribution that architects can make. Engineers do some kind of design, but it's not exactly what architects do. Planners don't really do design. So I'm interested in this question of design and urban and bringing them together. But this is not exclusive. That's my main point. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is these five and a half points. They're very simple. I think you probably know them already. But I'm going to do it through a story about some work that we're doing between a kind of theoretical and physical kind of research. So this is what I call design research. So on the one hand, I'm in the library, I'm writing and thinking and reading, but on the other hand, I'm also trying to build. I'm an amateur architect, so I'm not a professional, but nonetheless, I try and combine these two kinds of practice. So thinking in library and reading, and drawing, and then making physical practice. And I think that, again, I'd like to think this is a possible mode for doing architectural urban design research. And I'll do that by showing you a little bit about the work in Batam. And then finally, if we have time, there's a kind of moment where Samarang becomes important in the story. So I'm going to be quite quick through these 5.5 points because I think you know them already. First point for an ideal school of urban design. Remember, my framework is Southeast Asia. This is not a universal story. Spatial reasoning is the first unique condition that I think architects bring to urban design. And spatial reasoning is not artistic spatial expression. It's a kind of rationality that is expressed through space. So here, the rise of big data and the rise of data and quantitative ways of understanding cities, so urban science, is very significant and inescapable today. But we can't leave it to big data scientists. We have to do it through space. So spatial reasoning becomes very important. So it's the spatializing of data becomes very important. And there we can become much more in our own comfort zone. The distance between us now, the size of a door, the size of a step, the proximity to space, distance, scale, organization. These are all architectural principles, but they have to intersect now, I think, with this the question of reasoning. So spatial reasoning is a new kind of terminology, I think, which is relevant in this environment. And these are just images from my own sketchbook when I'm thinking about the distances between, say, a stair, but also the distance between, for a public space, for a sidewalk, or the width of a street, the width of a PKL, or a becak, or a car, or a truck. We all have to know that. We know that already. But that has to be intersected with this kind of the world of big data. So this is what this number one tries to talk about. This is a little bit of an image of our lab, and this is the first picture of Batam you can see here. And here we are working with big data scientists, but we're doing it on architectural terms. So we bring them away from the data sets and try and think about it spatially. So these are what these images are doing, and these are some images of the project that I'll show in more detail later in Batam. The second one, again, remember I'm talking about what it means to think about the city in Southeast Asia, and also China and India. The second one, this is very hard to translate into Bahasa. It's also hard to understand even in English. Fragile obduracy. The easiest way to think about this is something which is very stable, but also fragile at the same time. And the best example I can think of is my grandfather's changkul. Maybe you know this story. A young farmer, has a changkul, and he said, "This is my grandfather's changkul. He gave it to me, and his grandfather gave it to him. I've changed the handle of the changkul 5 times, and I've changed the blade of the changkul 3 times, but it's still my grandfather's changkul." That's fragile obduracy. Is it the form that stays the same, or the material changes? So this is a philosophical point about the formal cause and the material cause. So where is the identity of the changkul? Is it in the form or the material? Of course it's both, and it's a dialogue. If you look at this in the kampung behind you in Batam, you can see many my grandfather's changkuls going on. Because these houses, the form is the same, but it's gone from bilik to tin to concrete. So the form often stays the same, but in fact the material processes change. And that's a very typical feature of kampungs. Many kampungs in Indonesia look like they were made in the last 2 or 3 years, but in fact are 80, 90 years old. So they're permanent parts of the city, but they're fragile. So this kind of permanent, and this is a very important principle. If you read Aldo Rossi also talks about that same idea, about the permanence of the city and the changeability of the architectural elements. Here I think we have to extend that idea to the material logic. So my grandfather's changkul is this idea of a kind of fragile obduracy. Number 3 is medium thinking, and this comes back to my earlier point about big data. We're now swimming in data. There's so much data. Every single smartphone is gathering data. Every single source of census data, satellite data. There's so much data. And we have to, as architects and urban designers, start to think critically about the source of that data, where it comes from, how it's gathered, and what it's used from. This is an image from all the different tools that are being used in my lab in Singapore for doing urban research. And we decided to photograph all of them at the same scale. So you see the top smartphones and sensors and a whole range of different kind of techniques, all the way up through to larger presses which are used to do material studies, tripods. If you want to do field work, you have to have heavy boots. So this is social science all the way through to urban science. So this image is just a kind of reminder that we're always now working with tools and data, and we have to think about critically how we engage with that. And this is like a new medium for doing urban research. It means, of course, we still have to use a pen and pencil. I think that's still kind of fundamental. For older people in the room, I think we all learn how to draw, and that becomes really significant. But you can't hold on just to drawing. You have to be thinking about social media data, satellite data, and so on and so on. This is just another version. These are 3 of my colleagues who are thinking about data, and this is the same point I made earlier. This is basically Excel spreadsheet data, which has been spatialized and put into a map. And again, it's the same kind of data that I showed you at the beginning. Number 4, viscosity is not flows. We now know, of course, that architecture and cities have form, so they have a kind of physicality to the, they have a physicality, but they have the flow as well, the flow of people, the flow of traffic, the flow of data. So it's a physical condition, but it's also a kind of flow, and it also involves a kind of a formal dimension as well as an event. So this is an event. The building will stay here after we're gone, but this event will remain in the memory of the building. So there's a kind of dual process going on. However, very typical in Indonesian cities is something between form and flow. And I don't know what the Indonesian word is, but in English it's called viscosity. And viscosity is the difference between oil and water. So water and oil have different viscosity. So oil has a stickiness, so it's not flow exactly. It's a different kind of flow. And this is an example from Jakarta. This is near the railway station, and everything that you see in between the building here and the traffic is viscosity. So these are people making money, they're making a livelihood, but they're also part of urban life. They're also the reason we might go. This is also part of public space. So of course, if you're a transport planner, this is not very nice because we know this causes traffic jams and so on. It's one of the stories. But in Singapore, this was eradicated, and we just produced only flow. And this is also problematic, I think. And most people in Singapore now are also a little bit, rindu for this kind of condition as well. So we must remember that. So I think flow is important, but flow comes out of the logic engineered city. And I think the city in Southeast Asia has to theorize and think about the concept of viscosity, which is not only form nor flow, but in condition in between. And that's what you see here, these slow motorbikes, people serving food, the shade, and all the kind of public life that happens in between those two conditions. So that's number 4. This is the beginning of a study that we did to look at the co-presence of viscosity and flow inside a whole range of street sections. All of these street sections are from Asia. Very easy to do. You just go onto Google Street View, and then you kind of get something to calibrate, and then you can understand this incredible typological consistency across all Southeast Asia and many Asian cities. You can find this viscous condition where it's commercial and cultural and public as well as a flow. So we can't just say this is wrong, we have to try and theorize it. So this is a kind of example of that. Number 5, distributed agency. I think this is where architects and urban designers are a bit different. Architects have a stronger capacity to express their agency because normally they work on simpler projects. It's just the client and you plus the subcontractors. That expands when you come to thinking about urban design because the urban conditions are much more public. So there are many, many more voices. So this is an example from our Batam project. We're talking to Bapeda, we're talking to the community, we're talking to the people who own the land, we're talking to the big data people in my lab, and so on. So this is a very, very significant aspect of doing design. It's not the same as architectural design. It's not you expressing your will, but it's a much more complex negotiation. And typically, agency, in other words, the ability to act, is distributed. So I think this is also an important skill when you come from architecture. We want to bring design to urban design. Then what are the kind of extra components you need? And this idea of distributed agency is important. Okay, I've given you 5, and I think you probably know those already. They're quite straightforward. The half is what I'm going to show you next. And half is something we can't always teach, but we know is important. It's significant, but you can't always access it. That's why it's half. It's just a complicated, annoying condition. So near where we're working in Batam, this guy is in the city near the neighborhood where we work, and I often pass him, and I talk to him and say, look, what are you selling, and what are you doing, and we all know this kind of character through many Indonesian cities. And in English, there's another term, Pandora's box, which is in classical theories where you put all the things that you're worried about, all the repressions, you put in a box so you can keep them all tidied away. If you accidentally open that box, then all of that kind of stuff comes out. And all of that stuff, I think the first 4 words are probably okay, 5 words are okay, right, in design or in urban design and planning. So pleasure and beauty and charm and cute and comfort. These are all standard aesthetic categories that we use all the time in the studio. Cool, chic, probably also okay. Shabby, ugly, disgusting. These are not normally conditions which are theorized and discussed. Greed, avarice, fear, jealousy, and aspiration. I would say that this is important, all of this as a category, because this is one of the motive forces for city making. So if you think about the psychology by which projects are developed, by which cities are made, the question of aspiration. We have a good colleague in Singapore who's thinking about this work. Some of you might know work with Tim Arnold. Inside the question of aspiration are a whole range of often contradictory feelings. And architects always typically talk about beauty and charm and morality, but behind that, of course, are much, much more difficult, complex things. So if I was to make a school, he would be my professor of jealousy. He would be my first appointment and help us think, how do we grapple with these conditions? And I know that every architect who works with a client has to think through these questions, but it's very hard to say it openly. You could never theorize it directly, but it's still one of the motive forces for this. So I think that's why it's a half, because I don't think you can just say, I don't think it's say openly. But I think it's significant, really significant. So I don't know how you would teach this, and I'd be very interested to think about that. But when I talk to him, I always feel he's got some tiger claw, or he's got some crocodile skin, or Jima, or something, and he's always saying, this will help you here, this will help you with this. So I think he is a kind of agent of all of these feelings, these contradictory feelings. And I think he has an important role in the fabric of the city. Okay, we'll wait at the time. So what I'm going to do now is turn to some projects, just to try and you follow those five points. They appear in different places. I'm really going to show you one project that goes from, it's in Batam, and it goes from architecture up to the urban and tries to follow that story. What happens when you bring architectural expertise and architectural way of seeing the city into a more urban frame. This is just in summary. If you don't believe what you see on the left, then that's the conventional representation in a textbook. Space, form, time, representation, mobility, design, aesthetics. I just happen to think that all of those are not radical enough and they're not precise enough for Southeast Asian cities, which is why I think we're trying to theorize and nuance these terms in a more specific way. Okay, so the project I'm going to show you is called Tropical Town, and this project began in collaboration with Galiana and also Lily from the University of Indonesia, and it's a long developing project. It's taken so long because of me. I'm very, very slow, but now I can show you something physical, so I'm very proud to do that. The project is called Tropical Town and is based on the logic of an expandable house. So this is not for downtown city, this is for urban-rural fringe, right on the edge of the city where the urban and the rural mix. And it's very important because we also call it rumah tambah, so we can add to the house. And it's very important because the land values are often not high enough to support high density, but the aim is to produce a high density condition. So how do you do that? You can't do it at once, you have to do it incrementally over time. So that's what this logic is about. And there are a number of different principles inside this. You can see we have a new kind of rusun. It's called rusun kota, so it's smaller and tighter. And all the other fabric that you see are basically a whole range of these small units that we call rumah tambah or expandable house. The center of the expandable house is something we call the seed unit. And the basic logic of this is that you build foundations for 3 stories, but you build a house for 1. And then that means you've got potential, you've got structural potential buried in the ground. And then over time, you can build vertically, you can load those foundations over time. So what you do is you produce a kind of sandwich house. So you produce 2 slices of bread, this one, and then you ask the residents to put the filling over time. So that's also like a kind of hamburger. And on the roof, there's some technology, some PV, if the economic conditions are right. You also can do some rainwater harvesting. So the roof is a little bit technically significant, and the foundations are also technically quite complex. The stuff in between almost doesn't matter. Almost anybody can fill it, providing you get those 2 structural layers correct. In left here is a mosquito trap, an organic mosquito trap, because the site we had in Batam was had dengue and so on, so we had to think about alternatives. There's a septic tank here, and then there's battery storage in the kitchen and the motorbikes and so on. So this is the core of the house. This is in a way, the economic logic of the house. The yellow is dwelling, but all the other colors are income generating. And this is from data from Kuliah in Jakarta. So this is raw data that you come straight from the kampung. You try and understand the economic value of the kampung, and it's converted, and this is a kind of data to design piece of research. You bring that into this kind of logic. So these are all real pieces of empirical data which are translated into design. So you get the idea that these are both dwellings, but they're always economic units, which is one of the great strengths of kampung architecture. This is probably the most important drawing because it shows the same idea but in time. So you see along the bottom, this is the social unit, a couple. The couple have a child. The grandmother of the couple comes and joins. They have some employees and so on. It grows. So the growth of the social unit has to match the growth of the floor area of the house. But it also, can you see the red lines, the dotted lines going up? That's the consumption of water, the consumption of energy, wealth, and also the production of waste. So what you try and do is get those four different metabolisms roughly aligned to the capacity of that social unit to support them. So this is trying to align the physical fabric with the kind of social fabric. So to be really simple, this family is obviously earning far, far more than this family. But this family is also producing more waste, consuming more energy, and consuming more water. So this is the little, inside a kind of rusun, a sort of standard PU rusun, this is impossible. It's too expensive to build in the first place, and then too small very quickly. So this has no ability in a way to adjust. So this is not to replace rusun, but put another model into the market, and this is what this idea is. Here's an example where we're more illustrative. These are for developers to try and show how that might look literally, and there's a different kind of life stages of the building. And then here we can see this is a colleague who's done a larger animation just of the growth, possible model and the growth of that unit. And this is when we move from the unit itself into different parametric examples of different studies, of different combinations of the rusun and the logic. So this is using some very interesting sort of parametric techniques, which are quite simple, but are used here to support the tropical terminology. Okay, so this is the section. So now we move away a little bit from that sort of the economic and the energy dimensions, much more into the architectural logic. You can see the foundations, the lifting of the unit here, the orange penguin tank, the septic tank, bamboo, and the urban dimensions of the scheme. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly through here so you can see these. This is my point about distributed agency. There are many different people involved in designing it and making suggestions and possibilities, the lending of the land and so on. So we're very proud about the launch earlier in the year. And then this is the first time where we tried what does it mean to lift the roof. This is actually quite a complicated technique to achieve. So it's a very simple house with a very complex system that we had to test this. Now, I love this image of our neighbor sort of helping, willing the lifting of the roof. So this is our very first trial of the roof. These are the kind of developer images. We want to kind of sell the house. This is 36 square meters, so it's a very small place. It has some productive landscapes. This is the septic tank in the front. The septic tank is also feeding the bamboo, and the bamboo can be harvested to be used to make bilik and so on. So there's some important energy relationships. And then this is a really important image because it's the first time that we lifted the whole roof, and then you can build a second story. So the architect and the engineer provide the solid foundations and the roof and the lifting mechanism, and then you say, well, we don't have to design the rest, because that's not how kampungs work. Kampungs are usually self-built, and they're also part of this kind of my grandfather's chunkle logic. So this is a very important image for us about the logic of the project, and we had to prove that you could do that. This is actually quite a dangerous thing to do. It's not properly done. Okay, this is as it was just maybe last week when I was there, and I'm very proud. There's other things going on. You can see the top floor is using a kind of innovative bamboo. We have some colleagues who are working on coated materials using bamboo. We have some other colleagues, also I think ITB graduates who are working at using mycelium. This is also very interesting. I just keep an eye on the back. This is the one building, and keep an eye on the back and see what's happening in there. So what this shows is one unit, but it shows two other units behind. Our research funding cannot afford to build those. So you can maybe see that these are only like a stage set. So this is a kind of a fake, this is fake news. So can you tell which is real and which is not? This one is real. And this comes to the medium question. What's the medium of architecture, architectural and urban research? Well, the medium is cable block and concrete, but it can also be plastic and spandrel materials, basically spandrel printing technology. So we should be using spandrel technology, amazing printing technology, to mock up one-to-one to think about physical public spaces without the expense of having to build a building. And this is a kind of widely used technique, but I haven't seen it used certainly not in Batam. So I love this image because this shows this is our mosquito trap in the foreground, PD driven, and then these are the two realities, both perfectly scaled. For us, it allows us to move away from the house to start to think about the spaces in between. And as we all know, urban design is the spaces between the buildings. So I think this becomes a really interesting possibility that we can still physically think about the urban spaces, even though we don't have a client maybe who can fund the whole large complex project like that. You can see the spandrel technology's even got the bamboo. It's very high quality printing, and this is just somebody in Batam. They're really very interesting local expertise. I love this image as well because then you can reveal the fake news from behind. And I especially like this one because it's like a giant cable wall which is kind of floating up in the sky. But this is the difference that's between an architectural project and an urban one. Because now we're thinking about the spaces that the architecture produces. So in concert, all the different pieces of architecture collectively start to produce. This is a semi-public done at the back in the tropical town plan. So when I said earlier, dimensions and proximities, we anodize about the distance that should be. It has to be wide enough for one motorbike to go through, but it can't be too wide because it reduces the density of the overall fabric. So what are the kind of dimensions that you require in a way to think through something small and rippling through to the kind of larger project? And then behind you can see the main public space or the semi-private space. This is a bit more fake and real. You can see the relationship here. Underneath here is a 7,000 litre water tank. So most of the water from the roof is stored here in situ. And given that so many cities now are sinking, catch the water before it goes to the aquifer is absolutely crucial. I'm sure you know that. This is a big engineering school, so you know that story. But there are many simple techniques to do that. And this is one. And here you can see a little bit more of that kind of collective private space, which is produced by the three rubber units at the back. And this is the aquaponic pond for the fish, and then you can see the septic tank next to it. We did some other experiments. This is a rammed earth wall at the back. I don't know if you've ever done rammed earth studies here. I thought it was going to fall down really quickly, but this has been going 18 months and it's still okay. So even in a humid tropical environment, it seems to be working. Okay, real and fake again. So I love this image because this is the fish feeding the spinach, and this is the septic tank feeding the bamboo. So these are two short cycles between waste and production, which are just in the Campbell scale logic. So this is the beautiful mycelium work that ITB graduates worked on. Adi Riza from some you know him. And this is the second story above, and then you can see the relationship to our neighbor who looks after the spinach. He's a very important neighbor in the story. And And this is the last thing that we're doing. We haven't done it. We'll start to work on this now. This is called Rumah Tamba, or sometimes Rubah for short. And this is called Kebun Susun. We're going to call it Bunsun. So we want to also have an integrated calorie production inside the logic of the kampong. And we think we can produce 20% of the calories for that kampong inside one of these units. So if you can gather 50% of the energy from the roof, you can gather 100% of the water, maybe not to drink, but certainly for other purposes. You can manage 100% of your waste, and you can gather maybe 20% of your calories locally. Then this is far more resilient than any other kind of model I think that's on the market. It's also more expensive, so this is the next discussion we have to have. So again, this is all off the shelf. There's nothing very complex. This is everything you can do in Batam now. This is not, except for the bamboo, which is lab made. That's very complicated. And this is a plumbing system. Okay, so this is real in the front, but it's about to happen, and it's fake at the back to give you a sense of the way in which we can think about the architectural medium, expanding it for urban studies of this kind. I think we don't have time for this, so I don't know. Maybe I can just speed up our condition. This is a software that we're using. This is a software called Earthscape, and this is where simple architectural gets complicated in big data. Could you simply turn on the lights, just for maybe 2 minutes? This is just 2 minutes. So this is the city of Semarang, and this is using existing data from Semarang. So this is everything that we already know. There's no new data here. And what it's doing, this is the land price, there's density here, there's away data about settlements. And what this is doing, this is a nightlight data, the satellite. And we combine everything that's available right now, and we identify optimal places to build. Where would you build higher density? Where would I build a tropical town? And this technique is a way of identifying site selection, optimal criteria for site selection. And you can see that these are all the different data sets we use on the left, and we compare it with Google Earth. Sometimes you have cadastral maps like this. So this is the optimal envelope, the white line, which is ideal for land conditions, for price, and for density. So quite low density, but surrounded by high density, perfect for kind of development in this kind of urban-rural fringe. And we want to produce high-density models, not only Rumah Tamba or tropical town, but other kinds of appropriate kind of formats. And you'll see in a minute. So here we can start with all of these along the bottom are different development models. And this one I think is called Rumah Tamba. So this one. These are usul and estate housing and a whole range of existing models. And we can simply, again, this is not full-blown virtual reality. It's simply saying what happens if you combine different kinds of existing models. And then we can read, you can study some of the trade-offs. In this case, it's just showing two data sets. It's just showing the density and the plot ratio, or not plot ratio, the area gained. The construction area. We can also think about how much water is saved, how much energy is generated, and how much waste is managed, depending on the different kind of models that are being used. So this, in a way, is a kind of trade-off tool, which goes from architecture up into a much more sort of urban planning relationship. What I find interesting is that I don't think urban planners would make this, but architects could, because it's a bit more spatial and a bit more graphic and a bit less quantitative. So I think the design has brought about something that you couldn't do in a straightforward engineering or a straightforward planning condition. So this is a sort of collaborative design, architecture, engineering, planning project. And the final thing you can see is that you can remove, there are all kinds of different kind of ways in which you engage with the landscape, and it produces this collective, the collective trade-off calculation at the end. I'm going to stop it here because this goes on to the next aspect. Okay, so this is the summary of where we've been. I've tried to argue that we have some things we already know very well, 5. We also have half that we all have to manage in different ways. And this is everything from beauty and aesthetics all the way through to the kind of really unpleasant things in life. But there are also motors and drivers of city making. This means, as an architect, when you're thinking about research, it's not just only historical research or theoretical research, but there's a certain kind of research which is possible, I think, between theory and writing and making. And I think that used to be only done at the level of building, whereas now I think we can increasingly think about ways in which city components can be thought about in that kind of physical way. So try and think about the project of urban design in this kind of precise way. So bringing design into the urban in the context of Southeast Asia. And as I said, if you take Southeast Asia, you add China, add India, demographically, quantitatively, that is the world's, that's the dominant condition in the world today. This is not a minor, separate condition, it's the dominant condition, and it's the most urgent one. So which is why I'm especially proud to be here at ITB, especially proud to conclude the first group of talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your very inspiring talk. Okay, any guests still outside? You can come here. Sudah tidak cukup ya? Oke, ya, karena pengunjungnya banyak yang berbahasa Indonesia, maka saya coba merangkum dari apa yang disajikan oleh Profesor Stephen. I try to summarize your talk today. Ada 5 poin untuk sebagai apa? Sebagai cara berpikir untuk urban design, khususnya rancang kota. Yang pertama adalah spatial reasoning, sesuatu yang mungkin dari background atau dari pendidikan arsitektur dan urban design sudah familiar. Yang pertama proximity, kemudian distance, scale, organization, resolution. Kemudian fragile obduracy, medium of thinking, viscosity, smart flows, distributed agency, dan yang terakhir adalah Pandora's box. Ini sesuatu yang mungkin intangible factors of designing area or urban area. Hal lainnya yang di highlight oleh Profesor adalah domestic metabolism yang menjadi landasan atau yang menjadi asas dalam menentukan bagaimana sebuah unit terkecil dari perancangan, yakni rumah, itu bisa dilakukan. Yang pertama adalah dengan mempertimbangkan konsumsi air, sampah, energi, dan income. So untuk memulai acara diskusi, karena memang ini acaranya adalah informal dan waktunya sangat singkat, saya persilahkan dari para hadirin baik mahasiswa atau anggota IAI untuk bisa bertanya atau punya opini lain dari apa yang disajikan oleh Profesor. The first is from Pak Tamrin.
Thank you, Professor King. To me, it's a very intriguing method, a very intriguing approach that you have shown us. I wonder how the market react to your experiment, because basically I want to know how you deal with the people's aspiration of a house, what they see as a house. It is something radical for most people, I think. So I wonder whether you have any feedback from the market. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. In fact, on Wednesday, I'm meeting a developer So we've been talking to developers all along. We began presenting this to government agencies, and government agencies just cannot compute. So I think in Indonesia, I think it may be different in China or India, different governance systems, but in Indonesia, the private sector is one of the biggest city makers, I think, as you all know. So we need to find a particular developer who is big enough and interested enough and prepared to take a risk. I think that's the way with most architecture. But in this case, we've gone a bit further than that. We've really identified what's the central. We think cost-wise, this is quite competitive with an existing low 36 square meter house. The big expense is the timber. We're using timber here, which I don't think you would normally do. So maybe exchange that with aluminium, which I think would be a great shame. But and then the other thing is the foundations. The foundations, you have to spend money on something you can't see. So how do you market that up front? So you have to spend a lot of. The site we had in Batam was very soft, and we had to pump a lot of very deep foundations. But in other conditions, we think you could do it in a much simpler way. So we haven't been able to test this outside Batam. But we're working at the same time with a marketing agency who's attached to one of the developers. Is what's a clever way you can market the potential of something you can't see? And I think that's one big hurdle. The second one is, maybe you saw the house opposite, the blue house. This is our great friend. Well, the blue house is a classic Batam house. If it's not blue, it's pink or purple, and it's a very, very strong aesthetic. And we fully expect this house to be painted. And so at the moment, this is for an architectural audience. So it looks beautiful and it's tasteful, but we think it's going to be beautified, if you like, later on. But the nicknames for the house is Rumah Tambah Kerja, Rumah Tambah, Rumah Sayur, I think it's also called. So there are many nicknames for this house in the neighborhood. And I use the nicknames because nicknames are a way of starting to own the house. So the land is donated to us for 5 years by the Lura, I think, and he will move into it. But we always ask him, how do you feel this month? And he said, it's too crazy for me. And then a month later, maybe. And then 1 month later, maybe. I've asked my wife now, and then my children. And at the moment, they're very excited that they're going to move in January. So I think every society has great capacity to make radical acts. So I don't feel this is doesn't have to be a grassroots consultative stakeholder approach exclusively. And I think if it is, then I think that's what planning is very good at. But architects have agency, but you've got to be very careful about it. And I think you will have experience of that as well. So I think those are the two big issues. How to market something you can't see. And I think that there are 2 or 3 interesting developers who are interested, I hope. And the other one is to, in a way, make familiar something which a lot of people are already they're quite happy with quite radical tastes. Blue is quite a radical choice, I think. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you. Kuliah?
Yeah, thank you very much for the great lecture. And Dana and I, we had the pleasure to visit it 1 or 2 months ago, so it's developed incredibly since then. And one thing is, yeah, indeed, it gathers a lot of interest from architects because we posted it on our Instagram account and it like got 3,500 likes, like crazy, like wow. You know, and then people started to ask the same question, what are the costs? And there was a little sub-discussion with Bobby and Asriel and starting about the building cost. There was a great response to it. But actually my question is, or what I really find very interesting is Shakti-esque set piece you set up. And of course, now my question is as architects or urban designers, as we make blue foam models and shift around the massing in order to sort of find a good solution, are you shifting around your scaffolding and with your wallpaper, with your spun look around, in order to determine the qualities of the spaces in between. And of course, yeah, one of the measurements you mentioned was like a scooter should fit through. But if you would shift on maybe more elements, how would you determine if a space is good or performing in a certain way you want and expect? Because at the end of the day, you don't have the people living there.
Yeah, also a good question. I think the power of the drawing and the power of the blue foam model, it is so efficient, incredibly efficient. And even if you're doing full-blown parametric models with sophisticated kind of renderings, there's nothing like just cutting up some blue foam and feeling the scale and the size and so on. So I don't think that this is a kind of replacement for that. In fact, there are many things about this that we couldn't study. Maybe that one. It's very difficult to move. I mean, you can move it, but it's quite difficult to move. However, it gives you quite a remarkable sense of scale to stand in it. It's a very physical feeling. And what we can do now is we can crowd it. We can put many people in. We can put children in. We can have events there, and you can test it as a public space to a certain degree. Of course, as you saw, the real building has a lot of porosity, so you can actually open it up. And there's some quite nice opportunities to dissolve the ground plane, which you can't do with this. So the stucco, I think, has a kind of crude, straightforward, just do it logic, but I think it's under discussed and understudied as a medium.
I must say, the first time for me to encounter a sort of one-to-one scale urban model, because it's also maybe possible here because the project or the building is not so big. But it would be really a fantastic chance to really make several configurations possible and then see what happens, or how it feels like. Maybe there's some new discoveries. Really amazing.
So it's not that sophisticated, but it does things that the blue foam model can't do. So that is just to say, there's one extra tool in your bag as building designers and architects, and if you have to make friends with a good scaffolding company because they are very, very significant, I think, potentially. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ada lagi? Okay, silakan langsung aja ya.
Hello, my name is Reza. I studied I did my PhD in German right now. I do have a quite. First of all, I would like to say this is a really interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I do have a couple of questions which I hope you can answer. The first one is, you said that you only make the base, the floor, and then the roof only, and then you have the fittings accordingly to the users. So you also include them in participatory design while you're making. That's the first question. And the second question will be, who do you think this house is for? Is it for low middle income people, or is it for middle income people? Because I kind of see that you have a shift paradigm of kampung, which is supposed to be for low income people, and then it's make them expandable house, because that's why when you see Taman Sari, you have houses that stack up each other. But when it comes to middle income people, I think they have a different paradigm where they want to have their own land. Do you see this house will be only for one family user, or for 2 or 3 families? I think that's
also a good question. Good questions. What was the first question you said?
The participatory part where they feel.
I mean, we're architects, so this looks more architectural than it should. So it's looking a little bit more carefully detailed, and because we wanted to be in an exhibition and so on. So this is an architect's version. I fully expect that the kind of the infill will change, but the only thing that we're providing are the foundations and the roof and the structural stability. So in fact, there are many, many mistakes and improvisations that can be made. It's quite a safe experimental space between these 2 layers. So that's why we try and do as much as possible, make it safe and secure, structurally safe and secure. Maybe aesthetically not so safe and secure, but structurally we're not going to kill anybody because somebody's trying to lift a 3rd story on 1-story foundations. And that every kampung construction site I've ever seen is overloading the foundations, as we saw in Lombok. I don't know what the calculations were, but an earthquake at that scale, the construction quality must play a role. Buildings have become weapons in that situation. So we want to say that this is a safe building and it's not going to become destructive. However, if you paint it purple, maybe it offends you, but it's not going to kill you, right? So that's the first logic, and we want to encourage that. And the second logic, which I think comes to your second part of the question, we began by studying kampungs. I don't know the exact figure, and I have never found authoritative research that shows this, but I have read that kampungs still accommodate over 50% of Indonesian urban populations. And I've seen some figures say 60%. And flying in over Bandung today, I could see why it could even be higher, right? It's the dominant form of urban housing and business. So many things you can learn from kampungs. First of all, they're self-built. They have a kind of internal construction logic. They are not that dense. Kampungs are often medium density. They could be higher density. They don't look after their waste very well. They have strong social kind of values and strong public spaces, but they often destroy large open public space. So the gardens and the streets are kind of very, very, very powerful public spaces. But the alun-alun or even the badminton square, is often destroyed by horizontal expansion. So we said, what can you learn? And also, kampungs are very good at producing income. In fact, there are people live and make businesses in kampungs. So this is a really important logic, and that's what the Rusun logic destroys. The Rusun produces high quality housing, but destroys the income, or the income opportunities. So we tried to say, well, how can you improve on the kampung model? So that's our target. We want to maintain everything that's good about the kampung, but improve the structural stability, improve the ability to harvest water, manage waste, and maybe energy, and maybe some food. And we took the logic to the edge of the city where land values are marginal, and this is where it becomes a kind of desolate sort of urban-rural type condition. Now it's precisely the market. There are many people living in these RSS houses, and that's so bad. The quality is so bad, and it seems to me that all of us as architects, in 1 hour, can make a better scheme that is typically built en masse. So that's what we try to do. What can we learn from the kampung, what's already the dominant form of housing in Indonesian cities, and bring it, not a radical new solution, but tweaking it a little bit to the emerging edges of the city. We could do this also in a kampung, but I think that's a different project actually. How you build in a kampung is different to this. So this is a kind of greenfield situation.
Thank you very much.
Baik, ada lagi dari mahasiswa? Oh, oke, baik.
Hello, my name is Ridwan. I was studying here 4 years ago. So my question is more towards the process of a design and research. So in the practice of architecture, throughout the design process, in order to respond to the context, architects will gauge the result based on their guts or their past experience, right? Yeah. Hence, the result may or may not giving a positive contribution to the city. So my question would be, as a researcher, what's your opinion on this kind of common practice? And second, do you think a thorough research will significantly drive the result to a different direction and really help? And what do you suggest to us as an architect to drive a better result in order to respond to context?
Okay, that's a great question. Maybe you heard this phrase, evidence-based design. So evidence-based design for me is a really dangerous, but I can see why. It's not normally architects don't say evidence-based design. It's mostly planners and big data, big science people. And I can see why they bring that, they make that phrase. It's because they think that architects basically design from their gut, as you put it. And I don't think that's good enough, actually, anymore. All the modernists, Le Corbusier and all the very famous kind of modernists wanted to design a kind of machine aesthetic, but no, not really a machine. So they didn't really understand the technology, they didn't really understand the data. They didn't really understand the science of buildings, but they were reaching for the look and the design and the machine aesthetic. And there's some famous examples of how modernist buildings have been just destroyed in terms of their ability to be cool environments or to heat properly or cool properly or so on. So I think it's, although evidence-based design is a bad term, it's architects' responsibility to respond to it. And what I try to show is aesthetics is an important dimension. You know, my half is the aesthetic story, and it's cycling through here. But you can't use that one half to anchor the whole project. And the reason for that is simply that actually, all at our fingertips, we have data now, so much quality data. So why it's not so difficult for us to get density data, satellite data, and so on. I think I'm working in a lab where all of that stuff is around, so maybe it's certainly easier for me. But there are incredible data hacks. Abilities to gather data, think about data. So this is what I a little bit mean by the kind of by the medium in which we work. We're using cameras, sensors, humidity measures. We can do local urban science as architects. That's because the tools are in our pocket already, right? So I happen to see. You know, I was never a very scientifically oriented architect. I have to say I'm a gut architect, but I think that's impossible today. I think except for maybe one or two fantastic projects, you do a big espresso kind of project, and then you have to think about the client and why is the client driving it? What kind of avarice or greed or expressive power that client wants to project. So that's when you use your kind of intelligence, your aesthetic intelligence, to kind of manipulate or even inquire into that. But I think that evidence-based design is a very powerful critique of architects. And I have lots of colleagues in my own lab who say, yeah, architecture is lovely, sweet, very beautiful, but we do evidence-based design, and we're building the evidence. And very soon you'll be out of a job because you'll just be doing that kind of, is it purple or blue, you know. So it's very important that we take it seriously. But the fact is, as a non-scientist, I can do kind of simple science. So if I can do it, I mean, this is, again, a technical university, so.
Oke, thank you. Ada lagi? Ada lagi pertanyaan? Dari mahasiswa, urban design, Rancang Kota. So, Professor, yes, yeah, I'm interested to your view. No, the video, the last video. Is it the software? I mean, is it developed by your laboratory or in collaboration with the government to provide the data?
Well, really, you know, this is a big long conversation, and I almost didn't include it because it's in a way quite a complicated story. But the simple story is all the data that you see here on the left is public data. So it comes to this question that you asked. If you go to the UN, you can get global UN population density data. If you go to BPS, Indonesia has some of the best census data. The FAO has agricultural data. There's so much data in the world. You can go onto Twitter and you can download, you can access a whole range of different kind of data sets to do with social media. So there's so much data around. What this does is just assemble publicly available. There's nothing expensive about the data. And we just combine it in different ways. So this is what I mean. This is an architect's response to the critique of evidence-based design in a way. So that's the first thing. The second is when you go into, you know, there are circles here. If you go to Bandung or Palembang, then that's higher quality data. So we just put high data inside global data. So you can see the data from one kampong. Maybe a student group has gathered that data. This is already valuable. But if you put that data in the context of UN data, in the context of global CO2 emissions or BPS data, the value of that small piece of data suddenly improves. And then there's another kampong in another city that somebody has also got data. So it's actually about just gathering together data that we already have. and they're nesting. So this high-res, low-res sort of logic. The final thing I wanted to say, I didn't say at the end, is that this is, we made this in our group. We have one programmer, and we have one data scientist, and everybody else is an architect. So it's quite an interesting team. But it's basically open source, so if you go to this website, UI.systems, this is where it's still got a new website, but you can download the software, and you can download the public data. We have data for bundle, but it's not publicly available just yet. But you can please, we would love it if you downloaded it. It's beta only, so it may crash sometimes. But please download and play around and just let me know, or we would love to get your responses, how to improve it. And the logic of this is an open source. Free.
Thank you, Professor. I remember my conversation with Professor Gigi teacher from SUT. Her research, almost most of the research is related with the data sets in the nationwide of Singapore, in relation with how the data represent demographic that you already mentioned, and also quantitatively measure many things that make sense to the how urban designer can assess the various type of parameters. So do you think that this data-driven analysis or data-driven decision-making system is mostly drive how urban designer in the future start to work with the environment?
Well, first of all, Bigger Tunsa is a very interesting colleague, and she's using this very interesting. This is very low res. This is just what's around, what's available. Email the UN, download it, use it, calibrate it. So this is not very sophisticated, although we can do lots of things, so it's out there. Bigger Tunsa is working with a data set where I think, many of you know, thousands of school children, and they all wore a kind of sensor for like, I don't know, a year or something. And they got so much data about CO2, about heat, about mobility, and it's a very, very powerful data set. She's doing serious data analytics on that very comprehensive data set. So she, I think, believes that it could be data-driven. I don't believe this word data-driven is wrong. We have to be data sensitive, we have to be data aware, we have to make sure that our representational tools that we use have to be sensitive to data. We can't just rely on our gut, our intuition. But this is not data-driven. I'm still an architect. I have to understand jealousy and avarice and beauty and pain and so forth. So that, if Bigger was here, we're going to have that item.
Okay, thank you. Ada lagi? The last question? Yes.
Thank you for your time and your lecture. My name is Hafid. I'm a student here in architecture, majoring in architecture. I would like to ask for your comments on these very, very important issues that we are facing in Indonesia. Right now, I see that it is a very, very common things that even architects and also urban designers did when they are trying to organize a city. Like in recent cities development here, especially like in Bandung and Jakarta, often the urban designers are trying to generalize the face of the city. Like they are trying to make the city as organized as possible, and also create the city as beautiful as other global cities. Well, that also means it obliterates the face and the characteristic of the city itself. I would like to ask for your comments on that. Is it really matters for us to make that the city looks organized as possible, despite the fact that it also obliterates the characteristic of the city itself? Thank you.
I think you answered your own question. I can't, of course, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, but let me think. At the center of the question is this looks organized. Right? There's no one organization, right? Hundreds of different ways a city is organized. If I live in a house in a kampong, then I organize my house in one way. and maybe the kampong's organized another way, and then the city system, the transport system is organized another way, and then the monumental system of the city with kind of heroes and public monuments is organized in another way. So maybe what you're referring to is, in a way, the top-down city, the top-down organization of the city. And I think the main point I would always emphasize is that there are multiple systems of organizing, and you have to understand the different ways in which they work. And sometimes they clash, and sometimes they support each other. So you're always looking for ways in which the two systems can be joined together and combined. And I think that's what architects do very well. A really good urban designer knows how to not solve a problem by excluding one condition, but bringing both together and making a third condition. That's the classic. It's very difficult to do, but that's, so you don't try and simplify the question in order to make a nice result. You try and say, well, what are all the complex issues here, and maybe I can produce something that allows all of them to interact according to their own logic. So for me, the most obvious, it looks organized, whereas in fact, this is why I'm interested in the question of what's the percentage of people who live in kampongs? I think it's the major urban question, but it's not the highest urban design question if you think about the logic of the state, maybe. So maybe there's different organization systems, and one aim that we might have, or that I certainly have, is to understand the organizational systems of the kampongs. Because unless that's revealed, it's just ignored as badly organized. So you have to be wary of how certain things are called, this is organized and that's not organized. That's already an excluding logic. So maybe that's not organized according to this logic, but it has its own organization. So that's what we try to show, basically, that if you go to a kampong, there is a certain kind of, there are some disorganizations for sure, around waste, public space, water management, I think are not so good, but economic management is actually quite powerful. So there is a kind of logic inside the kampong that gets ignored by the logic of the rusun, which looks like organized housing. So I'm simply saying, I'm starting to repeat myself, but of course I agree with you. But the final thing is to say, I think there's something incredibly powerful about Southeast Asian cities, and it'll be a long, long time before Singapore, before Bandung looks like Singapore. So I think you can be safe. In the meantime, maybe 20 years or so.
One more last question.
Actually, this is related to what his question is. Because you mentioned before that you have a really big data set, and then this www.ul.systems, and everybody can source it. Is it also compatible for Mac and Windows? Hopefully it is. No, that's not the question, sorry. My question is actually related to his questions. You mentioned before that you have a lot of data sets, including waste management, economic, and everything that are tangible data. And on the other hand, when you see Indonesian with all our culture and social dynamics, they are intangible data. How do you put that intangible data into your design process?
Yeah, well, that's exactly why I call it half. I don't do it because it's not data. Like, how do you quantify jealousy? How do you quantify pride or aspiration? You can't do it. But I think we can handle that half. It has to be our expertise somehow, but not excluding the data. So I think an engineer, I think, will probably be driven by all those emotions, but not be aware of them, because it's so quantitative and oriented as a discipline. So that's what I mean by the half. The half, you can't just study it, you can't just say, but it's in there, and it's doing work, and it's complicated work. And that's why it's so significant, especially in Indonesia, which has this incredible cultural heritage. It's so diverse and so distinctive and so on. So I think absolutely, I completely agree.
But this half is not equal to culture in a way.
It's just pointing. It's pointing culture. It just says there's something. You can't put it inside a big. You can't put it inside a big data set. it's not data. Of course, there's many people who try and turn it into data. If you look at livability index, you know, happiness index, you know, Austria, Vienna, Melbourne, Vancouver, always come on top because people are happy. But I just don't believe that. I just don't believe it. So we have to be very clear about where's the edge of the data. And so my half is my attempt to point to something which is intangible or beyond the data. And so,
Thank you. And is it compatible for Mac and on?
yes, Windows now, and I hope by next month Mac.
Okay. We come to the end of this program, so give a big applause to Thank you very much, Professor, for this fruitful discussion.